What if the most terrifying demons were not cast down from heaven or dragged up from hell, but born from the fractures of human suffering itself? In the deserts and rivers of ancient Mesopotamia, the first cities rose, and with them rose shadows, spirits that clung to grief, sickness, and fear. Imagine a mother placing her child to sleep, only to hear scratching at the threshold, the breath of something waiting to steal the infant away. Imagine rivers that once gave life boiling with unseen sickness, as if a spirit had poisoned their flow. Imagine walking past a doorway at dusk and feeling unseen eyes watching, a presence that needs no body to be real. These were the Udaku and Adimu, spirits of restless dead who fed on the living when proper rites were denied. These were the Gallu, underworld hounds dragging souls into shadow. This was Asag, a monstrous force whose presence made rivers steam with death. This was Rabasu, the ambusher at thresholds, feeding on fear the moment you hesitated before stepping inside. And most infamous of all was Lamashtu, the predator mother inverted, who hunted infants and drank the blood of those too weak to fight. The Sumerians did not see these as myths. They carved their names on clay tablets, forged amulets in their shapes, and wrote incantations to hold them at bay. To them, these were not stories, but neighbors always hungry, always watching. The forbidden truth is unsettling. If spirits are born from pain, then as long as humanity suffers, these predators have never truly died. Evil does not always appear as a towering god of chaos or a roaring beast of apocalypse. Sometimes it is quieter, more insidious, growing like mold in the cracks of everyday life. In Sumer, the world's first civilization, evil took the form of spirits woven into the architecture of daily existence. These were not distant monsters lurking in cosmic heavens. They were parasites clinging to grief, disease, and thresholds. Their presence transformed every birth, every death, every doorway into a potential battleground. This was the architecture of Sumer's evil. Not a single figure, but a system of spirits that haunted the human condition itself. The Udaku and Adimu were the restless dead. When a body was left unburied, or rituals of mourning were neglected, the spirit became hungry, feeding on the vitality of the living. The architecture here was simple, yet devastating. Society itself had to perform correct rites, or the boundaries between life and death collapsed. Every graveyard, every neglected corpse, was a crack in the structure, allowing Udaku to enter. The system was sustained by fear of forgetting the dead. Without ritual, the city itself could rot under the weight of spirits. Then there were the Gallu, terrifying underworld spirits, described as dogs of death. They were not creatures of chaos, but bureaucrats of the afterlife, hunting and dragging souls down to the underworld. Their presence implied that death was not a neutral transition, but a transaction, a system enforced by predators. You did not simply die, you were collected like tribute. It's created a society where death was not only feared but managed, where every funeral was a negotiation with unseen enforcers. The Asag was different, embodying plague and pestilence. It was said to poison rivers and boil them into sickness, accompanied by hordes of diseased spirits. Here the architecture of evil spread into the very environment. Water, the lifeblood of Sumer, was inverted into poison. The message was clear. No place was safe. The same rivers that sustained crops could carry death. The Asag revealed that evil did not need to strike openly, could infiltrate the very elements of survival. And then there was Rabasu, a shadow at thresholds. He was never described as ruling vast domains or leading armies. Instead, he waited by doors, lurking in liminal spaces, ambushing those who passed. His presence reveals another truth of this architecture. Evil hides in transitions. Every doorway was dangerous, every threshold a test. This made even ordinary acts entering your home, walking into a temple, a ritual moment where fear itself was harvested. Finally, Lamashtu, perhaps the most feared of all. Unlike the bureaucratic Gallu or the environmental Asag, she was a predator with intent. She hunted newborns, drank their blood, and stalked mothers in childbirth. Her image was carved on amulets, and her name whispered in terror. She inverted the most sacred role, motherhood, to horror. The architecture of evil here was intimate. The very act of giving life became a potential opening for predation. No household was beyond her reach, no cradle beyond her hunger. Seen together, these spirits form a system. The Udaku and Adimu exploited death without ritual. The Gallu enforced underworld contracts. The Asag poisoned the rivers of life. The Rabasu lurked at thresholds. The Lamashtu preyed on the beginning of life itself. From cradle to grave, no moment escaped their architecture. They filled every gap in human existence with terror, weaving themselves into the structure of daily life. And this is what made them so powerful. They were not random figures of fear, but a network. You could not be born without risking Lamashtu. You could not cross a threshold without fearing Rabasu. You could not drink from a river without risking Asag. You could not bury the dead incorrectly without calling forth Idamu. You could not die without Gallu dragging you down. Life itself became a labyrinth of dangers, every step haunted by spirits waiting to consume. The forbidden truth is that this architecture has never truly disappeared. Our modern world still echoes its design. Hospitals where death and birth mingle remain haunted by the same archetypes. Bureaucracies manage death certificates as Gallu once managed souls. Contaminated water still carries plague like Asag's curse. Fear of the dark at thresholds remains instinctive. Rabasu's shadow never gone. Even postpartum fears and the dangers of childbirth echoed the terror of Lamashtu. The names may change, but the system remains. Sumer showed us the first blueprint. Evil thrives not as singular monster, but as network. Filling every absence, feeding on every pain. The architecture of evil is a house built from trauma, its walls reinforced by ritual, its doors guarded by shadow. And once you see the structure, you realize you are already inside it. The Sumerians did not merely fear their spirits, they spoke to them in the language of symbols. For in a world where evil was everywhere, lurking in graves, rivers, thresholds, and cradles, protection could not be brute force. It had to be encoded. Symbols became weapons, incantations became locks, and amulets became the sigils that held the architecture of evil at bay. Astral predators fed on fear, but they recoiled before a language older than terror. The written, carved, and spoken mark. Take the Lamashtu amulet, perhaps the most iconic of all. It depicted her grotesque form: lion's head, donkey's teeth, taloned hands clutching snakes, nursing wild beasts instead of children. Around this horror were inscriptions, prayers begging for her banishment, protective spells written in cuneiform wedges. Mothers wore these amulets on their necks or hung them above cradles, believing the symbol itself held power to repel. In truth, the amulet functioned as sigil, a visual technology that bound the predator in representation. To name her, to depict her, to surround her image with counter-incantations was to twist her power back on itself. The Sumerians understood what occultists later confirmed: to trap a demon, you first had to speak its true name and inscribe its likeness. The Rabasu spirit of thresholds was confronted through architectural sigils. Thresholds themselves became marked lintels inscribed, doorposts anointed with offerings, carvings etched into entrances. To leave a threshold unmarked was to invite ambush. To mark it was to seal it with symbolic law. The liminal became battleground, and the symbol was the only weapon that could guard it. Every doorway in Sumer became a canvas of protection, every etching a whispered prayer in solid form. The Asag, whose plague-boiled rivers, was countered with symbols of water turned pure. Clay tablets inscribed with purification spells were buried near wells or riverbanks. The written wedge marks became ritual filters, visible locks that declared the water claimed for the living rather than the dead. Here we see a profound truth. Symbols were not metaphors but instruments. They were technologies of reality, shaping the flow of unseen forces. The glyph was a dam against the spirit's flood. The Udaku and Adimu, restless spirits of the unburied, were restrained through funerary inscriptions. Curses were carved onto tombs, warnings to the dead not to rise, threats to spirits who would trespass, oaths that sealed the grave with the authority of the gods. The grave marker was not memorial but contract. The cuneiform signified boundaries, a signature between worlds. Without inscription, the soul wandered. With it, the door was sealed. The symbol was the key to keeping death in its proper place. What unites these practices is recognition that symbols are not decoration but sigils, functional devices in an occult economy. Every wedge pressed into clay, every beast drawn on amulet, Every chant spoken and ritual carried weight. In Sumer, writing itself was divine technology, gifted by gods like Enki. To write was to create reality. Thus, to inscribe a demon's name was to bind it. To etch a curse was to enforce it. To carry an amulet was to anchor the invisible into the visible. And this language of symbols has not vanished. It has only shifted shape. Modern logos act as corporate sigils, marking thresholds of ownership. National flags flutter like magical banners, binding millions under patterns of color and line. Medical symbols, the rod of Asclepius, the Red Cross declare spaces as protected against disease, distant echoes of anti-Asag wards. Even the crucifix on the wall or the mezuzah on a doorway continues. Rabasu, a sign placed on threshold to ward what lurks unseen. The forbidden truth is this: symbols do not merely represent power, they conduct it. The Sumerians did not think their amulets stood for protection. They believed the amulet was protection, a channel of divine authority woven into shape and inscription. To misunderstand this is to see ancient people as superstitious. To recognize it is to glimpse a hidden technology. The technology of signs, the language of symbols, the grammar of the unseen. Astral hell, as described in earlier descents, speaks the same language. Corridors, false awakenings, shadows pressing on the chest, each is a sigil, a glyph with function. The Sumerians saw this before us. They knew spirits must be answered not with swords but with symbols, because reality itself bends through language. To carve a wedge into clay was to strike against an Edemu. To etch Lamashtu's monstrous form was to limit her reach. To guard a doorway with prayer was to turn Rabasu's own threshold into a cage. The forbidden truth is unsettling but liberating. The world is scripted. Every mark you see, whether carved, painted, broadcast, or branded, is a spell in disguise. The question is not whether symbols rule reality, but whether you can read the language or remain enslaved by it. The Sumerians left us the first dictionary of this hidden tongue.
Right.
And once you begin to read it, you will see. The architecture of evil is always written, and its undoing lies in rewriting. Blood has always been the oldest currency, the price extracted by gods, demons, and men alike. In Sumer, this truth was sharpened into ritual, embodied in the spirits who haunted their world. To the Sumerians, blood was not only crimson liquid flowing through veins, it was vitality, grief, essence, the energy that binds the living to the dead. Every spirit of Mesopotamia was hungry for it, whether literal or metaphorical, and every human act risked feeding them. The Ademu spirits of the improperly buried embodied this economy most clearly. When a corpse was denied proper rites, its spirit wandered, thirsty for blood. The living reported waking drained, sickened, haunted by nightmares. The Ademu were not merely vengeful, they were starving. Their hunger was not for flesh, but for the lifeblood of those who neglected them. To bury correctly was to pay your debt. To neglect was to leave the account open, with your blood as collateral. The Udaku worked in similar ways, attaching themselves to trauma. A battlefield, drenched in gore, was fertile ground for their emergence. The cries of the dying were offerings, involuntary sacrifices. Each drop spilled was coin in an astral treasury, feeding the spirits who thrived on violence. Wars were not only political struggles but blood rituals, sustaining invisible predators. The forbidden truth is that every empire, no matter how mighty, built its rise upon rivers of blood that nourished more than just conquerors. Then came the Asag, spirit of pestilence. His presence was said to make rivers boil, turning water, the essence of life, into liquid death. Disease itself became an offering. Each cough, each fever, each corpse carried away was blood tied to Asag. Epidemics were not random misfortunes, but harvests. The Asag revealed that even the natural flow of life could be inverted into a stream of sacrifice. Here blood was not shed by knife or wound, but by contagion spread invisibly, feeding the unseen. The Lamashtu turned blood into obsession. She stalked mothers and infants, drinking the life of newborns, corrupting the sacred moment of creation. Every childbirth became potential bloodletting, every cradle a site of sacrifice. Her economy was predation disguised as hunger. To give life was also to risk its immediate loss. Lamashtu was feared not only because she killed, but because she inverted the holiest bond mother and child into transaction. In her logic, blood itself was dowry for survival. Even the Rabasu took their toll. They were not predators of battlefield or nursery, but ambushers at thresholds. Crossing a door was a symbolic act and entry into safety, a passage into belonging. But the Rabasu turned every step into danger, demanding psychic blood through fear. Hesitation at the doorway, the dread before entering, the quickened heartbeat, these were subtle offerings. The blood here was not spilled visibly, but it flowed nonetheless, paid in adrenaline, in dread, in vulnerability. For the Sumerians, this astral economy explained the fragility of life. Every sphere of existence, birth, death, water, war, threshold, was a point of extraction. Blood was always demanded one way or another. Rituals of offering, sacrifices of animals, libations of wine-dyed red, all were substitutions. Payments meant to redirect the spirit's hunger. A goat's blood in a bowl was currency paid in advance, buying safety for a mother, a soldier, a city. The ritual did not end hunger. It satisfied the contract temporarily. Modern eyes might dismiss this as superstition, but the architecture persists. Blood is still extracted daily. Wars still spill rivers. Plagues still drain multitudes. Mothers still bleed in childbirth. Trauma still carries across generations. And though we no longer name them Udaku, Adimu, Asag, or Lamashtu, the pattern remains. Blood is still demanded, still converted into currency, still consumed by systems that thrive on sacrifice. The forbidden truth is that blood is both literal and symbolic. It is vitality, emotion, memory, energy. When you despair, you bleed into the astral. When you rage, you bleed into the system. When you grieve, your sorrow becomes coin. These spirits, born of Sumer, were simply the first to name the economy. They revealed what civilizations have always hidden, that survival is purchased, and the cost is always blood. Yet blood also resists. Every drop testifies. Every sacrifice accuses. The amulets and incantations of Sumer were not just barriers. They were declarations. We see the economy. We will not pay blindly. To recognize blood as currency is to withhold it, to redirect it, to break the contract. The ancient Sumerians glimpsed this, using symbols to divert hunger, rituals to transmute fear, and so can we. The forbidden truth is stark. Astral predators are not kept alive by power, but by payment. Blood is their economy, and despair their coin. The moment you refuse to bleed unconsciously, the market falters. The prison of spirits weakens. For every architecture of evil is built on sacrifice, and when sacrifice ends, the walls collapse. No system of spirits can endure without agreements, and the demons of Sumer thrive not only on blood, but on contracts. These contracts were rarely spoken aloud. They were implicit, sealed by ritual failures, by neglect, by fear. To the Sumerians, every encounter with the unseen was a negotiation. Every act of devotion or omission was a signature. Astral hell was not simply haunted by predators. It was governed by covenants that bound humans to the spirits they dreaded. The Edimu illustrate this perfectly. If a body was denied burial, or if the proper funerary rites were neglected, the spirit was released hungry, condemned to feed on the living. The omission itself was contract. To leave the dead unhonored was to sign away protection. The Adimu did not force themselves upon the city. They were invited by negligence. In this way, the Sumerian world taught that even silence was agreement, and every failure to fulfill duty became a pact written in absence. The Gallu, underworld hunters, were described as enforcers of a cosmic bureaucracy. They dragged souls into the realm of the dead, not by whim, but by mandate. To die was to enter their contract. The moment breath ceased, the covenant of mortality activated, and the Gallu collected payment. No human could negotiate their terms. The pact was universal, signed at birth. Yet rituals could delay their reach, offerings could bribe them, incantations could confuse their path. Even inevitability had loopholes, but the structure remained a binding agreement between life and death. The Asag spirit of plague operated on a different covenant. Disease was not seen as random. It was contagion governed by spiritual law. If communities failed to make offerings, neglected purification rituals, or angered the gods, Asag claimed his due. His contract was collective. One person's negligence could curse an entire city. In this way, Asag enforced civic responsibility. Health itself was not biology, but morality, a pact signed by everyone who drank the river's water. Rabasu, the ambusher at thresholds, embodied perhaps the most unsettling contract of all, the covenant of liminality. Every doorway, every border, every threshold was a legal zone. To cross without protection was to sign yourself over. A prayer, a carving, an offering was required to seal the passage safely. Without it, you entered Rabasu's contract. The threshold was his courtroom, the crossing your confession, the fear in your heart his seal. Then there was Lamashtu, whose predation was framed as transaction. Mothers were told to wear amulets, to make offerings, to hang incantations above the crib. Failure to do so was an unspoken pact. The child would be vulnerable, the mother's blood at risk. Her terror was not only in her violence, but in the inevitability of the contract she imposed. To give life without payment was to invite her. In this sense, childbirth was not simply biological but contractual, a negotiation between mother, gods, and predator. These pacts reveal the Sumerian worldview. Spirits were not chaos incarnate, but participants in a system of law. Contracts were everywhere, binding humans and demons alike. Even demons could be bargained with, delayed, appeased. Evil was legalistic, not random. And this legality was itself a trap. For once you believed that every act was contract, you lived in constant negotiation, and fear became compliance. The echoes of these covenants resound today. Bureaucracies demand paperwork as Gallu demanded souls. Neglect of the dead still haunts families with guilt. Modern Edimu, binding memory to obligation. Disease remains entangled with morality. Blame is cast on the impure, the negligent, the irresponsible, as if Asag's law still reigns. Doorways are still marked. Mezuzahs, crosses, protective charms echo the Rabasu pact. Mothers still wear protective tokens, faint descendants of Lamashtu amulets. The forms change, but the system persists. The forbidden truth is that these contracts were never abolished. They remain rebranded as law, debt, bureaucracy, and social ritual. Every job accepted, every debt signed, every waiver clicked on a screen echoes the same structure. Agreements we did not draft, forced by powers we cannot see, binding us through participation we mistake as choice. The Sumerians glimpsed this and left us a dark inheritance. The knowledge that spirits of pain do not rule by force, but by contract. And contracts, once seen, can be refused. For every clause requires consent, and consent can be withdrawn. To awaken is not to destroy the spirits, but to recognize their pacts for what they are: fraudulent agreements enforced by fear. The forbidden truth is this: you are bound not by chains, but by contracts. The Adum's hunger, the Gallu's bureaucracy, the Asag's plague, the Rabasu's threshold, the Lamashtu's predation all survive because humanity keeps signing. The moment you stop, their power falters. And what was once eternal law reveals itself as nothing more than an illusion ink that fades the instant you refuse to read it. The spirits of Sumer were feared not only for their hunger but for their heresies. They thrived by inverting the sacred order, turning what was meant to protect into what destroyed, twisting blessings into curses. The inverted moral code is the most insidious aspect of their system. It ensured that humans lived not in trust, but in suspicion, not in harmony, but in fear. Every sacred bond, every symbol of safety, every source of life could be flipped. This was not chaos. It was design a mirror turned backward, making the holy profane. Take Lamashtu, the predator mother. In every society, motherhood is sanctified. The bond of mother and child is archetype of protection. Yet Lamashtu inverted it. She was depicted with a lioness's head and a woman's body, taloned hands grasping snakes, nursing wild beasts while hunting human infants. The message was chilling. What should nurture can devour. What should protect can betray. Her very image was sacrilege, motherhood desecrated into predation. In this inversion, life itself became uncertain. If even the mother could turn killer, then nowhere was safe. The Asag inverted the sacred waters. Rivers in Mesopotamia were the veins of life. Euphrates and Tigris sustained crops, cities, and survival. But Asag poisoned them, boiling the waters into disease. What should nourish instead killed? Very essence of life became weapon. This inversion was more than myth. It reflected lived terror. Floods that spread pestilence, waters that carried plaguage disaster, reaffirmed the lesson that what appears sacred can become lethal. The Rabasu perverted the threshold. A doorway should signify transition from danger to safety, from outside to inside, from chaos to order, but Rabasu crouched there waiting. What was meant to shelter became place of ambush. This inversion weaponized liminality, making humans fear even the borders of their own homes. The Adimu twisted memory of the dead. Funerary rites should honor ancestors, keeping bonds intact between living and departed. But when neglected, the Edimu inverted that bond into predation. The beloved dead, denied ritual, returned as hungry spirits feeding on the living. What should have been protection, the memory of family, became curse. Inversion transformed kinship into danger, heritage into haunting. The Gallu agents of the Underworld inverted guardianship. Guardians should shield, guide, or protect. But Gallu were hunters dragging souls into shadow, not by rebellion, but by law. They were not brigands, but enforcers, bureaucrats of death. In this inversion, guardianship itself became captivity. The very system that promised order was revealed as predatory. This inverted moral code shaped Sumerian life. It instilled the idea that nothing could be trusted fully. Not mothers, not rivers, not thresholds, not ancestors, not guardians. Every sacred thing had its shadow. Every source of life could turn on you. This was how the spirits ruled, not only by fear of attack, but by corrosion of meaning. If the moral compass spins, then humans are disoriented, and disorientation breeds obedience. And this is not unique to Sumer. In every age, inversion has been the signature of oppression. War is named peace. Slavery is declared divine order. Exploitation is dressed as progress. The same logic persists. What should protect becomes what enslaves. Modern thresholds, courts, contracts, systems of law claim to guard us, yet often ambush us. Modern waters technology, media, medicine, nourish but also poison. Modern motherhood, sanctified, is also burdened, preyed upon by systems that consume rather than cherish. The same inverted grammar repeats, only with new costumes. The forbidden truth is that spirits of pain endure because they invert morality itself. They do not kill outright, they pervert the sacred, ensuring humans cannot trust their own foundations. The child's cry, the river's flow, the doorway's frame, the ancestor's memorial destabilized. This forces humans into perpetual vigilance, feeding the system with fear. But inversion can also be unmasked. To name it is to strip its disguise. Say, this mother is predator, but motherhood itself is sacred. This water is poison, but water itself is life. This threshold is ambush, but shelter itself remains holy. In doing so, humans reclaim what was inverted. The spell of inversion breaks, not by destroying the symbol, but by restoring it. The forbidden truth is this: Summer's demons still walk among us. Not as lion-headed mothers or boiling rivers, but as inversions. Systems that flip sacred bonds into contracts, that turn protection into predation, that dress captivity as guardianship. To awaken is to see inversion for what it is, to refuse its logic, and to reclaim the sacred from the profane. Until then, the spirits endure, for they feed not only on blood, but on broken meanings. Every spirit needs ritual, because ritual is the fuel that keeps a system alive. In Sumer, the forgotten demons were not sustained merely by chance encounters. They were woven into the fabric of daily life through repeated ceremonies, offerings, and practices. Some rituals were meant to banish them, others to appease them. Still others, when performed incorrectly, served only to feed them. The architecture of Sumerian spirituality was not one of isolated events, but of constant negotiation, a world where life itself was ritual. The Adimu and Udiku spirits of restless dead thrived on funerary failure. Burial rites were not optional but necessary contracts. The washing of the body, the lamentations sung by priests, the food, and drink offered to the spirit. These were rituals designed to bind the dead to peace. Neglect them, and the Edamu rose, feeding on the living. In this way, funerals became more than mourning. They were defensive ceremonies, closing doors between worlds. Without them, daily life became haunted. The Lamashtu demanded a different kind of ritual. Mothers wore amulets engraved with her monstrous form, hung charms near the crib, and recited incantations to drive her away. Each night was a ceremony, each birth a battlefield. The amulet was not jewelry but a portable altar, a ritual object declaring war against the predator mother. To protect a child was to live in constant ritual, reaffirming each day that Lamashtu's hunger was denied. Yet even this revealed the trap. Her power endured, because rituals had to be repeated endlessly. The act of protection acknowledged her presence, keeping her alive in memory and fear. The Rabasu ambusher of thresholds was confronted by rituals at doors. Oil anointings, carved inscriptions, offerings left at entrances, all were ceremonies to mark safe passage. Every crossing of a threshold became a ritual moment, an interaction with the unseen. The daily act of entering or leaving a house was a micro-liturgy, a negotiation with Rabasu himself. Without ritual, the liminal became lethal. With ritual, it became temporarily neutralized. The Asag, plague spirit of rivers, demanded collective rituals. Purification ceremonies were held at wells, sacrifices made at riverbanks, priests chanting prayers for clean water. Communities participated together, turning civic life into ritual defense. Illness itself was framed as failed ritual, healing as corrected ceremony. The river was never just water, it was altar, and every drink was sacrament. Even the Gallu bureaucrats of the Underworld were addressed through ritual. Incantations were spoken to delay their arrival, sacrifices offered to distract them, ceremonies performed to guide the soul safely past their reach. Death was not a single event, but a ritualized process, an extended negotiation with predators who claimed every life. Without ritual, Gallu's grip was instant. With ritual, the soul could at least attempt passage unbound. What unites these examples is the omnipresence of ritual. Every threshold crossed, every birth given, every death mourned, every illness endured, it was a ceremony. Ritual was not special occasion, but daily law. The Sumerians lived in constant awareness that the unseen required attention, and that repetition kept the balance. This is why amulets, chants, and offerings filled their homes and temples. They were not superstition but survival, a system of continuous appeasement. And yet, in this repetition lies the genius of the system. The more rituals required, the stronger the spirits became. For each amulet forged, Lamashtu's name endured. For each doorway marked, Rabasu's presence was reaffirmed. For each funeral chant, the Adimu were remembered. Rituals meant to suppress also perpetuated. Cycle was inescapable. To ignore ritual was danger. To repeat ritual was surrender. Either way, the spirits fed. This pattern is not ancient alone, it survives today. We mark our own thresholds with locks and passwords, modern sigils of protection. We ritualize death through funerals, still believing that honoring the dead prevents haunting. We ritualize illness through medicine, itself a system of chants and symbols dressed in science. Even in consumer life, we enact rituals scrolling endlessly, consuming news of fear, feeding unseen architectures with our attention. Each act, repeated, becomes a rite. Ritual never vanished, it only changed form. The forbidden truth is that rituals are everywhere, binding us to systems visible and invisible. In Sumer, the rituals fed the spirits of pain. Today, they feed corporations, media cycles, and unseen fears. The mechanics are the same. Repetition creates resonance, resonance creates reality. Every spirit survives not because it is powerful, but because we keep performing its rites. And so, to break the prison, one must break the ritual. Refusal, silence, or inversion. These are the counter ceremonies. But until then, the rituals continue. Every doorway crossed, every screen scrolled. Every fear repeated a liturgy of captivity echoing the ancient grammar of Sumer. To awaken within the grip of Sumer's spirits is to recognize that they never truly died. The names may have faded from clay tablets, but the patterns remain etched in our world, repeating like incantations disguised as daily life. Awakening is not escape into purity, is unveiling, the apocalypse. The moment the veil is torn away, and the system is revealed for what it is. And the forbidden truth whispers, the same predators of Sumer now walk in new masks, feeding not on offerings of goats or bowls of blood, but on our despair, our fear, our repetition. The first awakening is recognition of continuity. Udaku and Adimu still exist, not as named demons, but as the haunting presence of unresolved grief. The unburied dead of ancient battlefields have become the unacknowledged trauma of families, communities, nations. When grief festers, when the dead are forgotten, when rituals of closure are abandoned, the Edimu live again. To awaken is to see that mourning is not nostalgia, it is ritual survival. The ghosts hunger until they are honored, and the contract ends only with recognition. The second awakening is naming inversion. Lamashtu taught that motherhood itself could be corrupted, that the cradle could be coffined. Today, new Lamashtu stalk not as lion-headed women, but as systems that prey on children, war, famine, exploitation. Asag's plague was not only boiling rivers, but poisoned food chains, chemical wastes, pandemics. Rabasu's threshold remains in our doorways. But also in digital liminality, every login, every entry point vulnerable to unseen predators. To awaken is to see the archetypes beneath the masks, to recognize inversion not as myth, but as pattern that repeats itself endlessly. The third awakening is unmasking ritual. Every spirit of Sumer survived because humans fed them through repetition. Amulets worn, incantations spoken, offerings laid each reaffirmed the predator's name. Today, we perform new rituals.
Endless.
Cycles of horror, repeated fears, doom scrolling at midnight, these are offerings, daily libations of despair. Each click is a chant, each anxious thought a coin of energy. To awaken is to see ritual everywhere, to name it, to step out of its spell. The fourth awakening is withdrawing consent. Contracts bind only with agreement, and fear is consent unspoken. The Adimu claimed the unburied because families failed rites. The Gallu claimed souls by mandate of death's bureaucracy. Asag cursed waters when communities failed purification. Rabasu ambushed where thresholds were unguarded. Each pact was upheld by participation, even neglect. To awaken is to refuse, to withdraw consent, to stop signing the contracts of fear. When you cease to tremble, the shadow on your chest weakens. When you refuse the false awakening, the loop collapses. When you honor your grief, Edimu has nothing left to feed on. The final awakening is reclaiming the sacred. Inversions work because they corrupt what is holy. To undo them, you must restore meaning. Motherhood is sacred again when protected, not feared. Rivers are sacred again when purified, not poisoned. Thresholds are sacred again when guarded with awareness, not dread. The moral compass spins only as long as you believe it's inversion. To awaken is to flip it back, to see that suffering was never judgment but theft, never divine punishment but parasitic harvest. And in this realization lies liberation. The spirits of Sumer endure only as long as their grammar is unrecognized. Once you name the language, their power falters. Once you break the rituals, their economy starves. Once you reclaim the sacred, their inversion collapses. They were never gods. They were never invincible. They were patterns of predation, sustained by belief, repeated in ritual, disguised in symbols. The forbidden truth is that the architecture of evil is fragile. It appears eternal, yet it depends entirely on participation. Astral predators thrive not because they are immortal, but because we keep feeding them. To awaken is to stop. And when enough awaken, the system collapses. The apocalypse is not fire from the sky, it is unveiling, the sight that ends illusion. To awaken is to step into forbidden knowledge, that every spirit of Sumer is alive in our world, clothed in new forms, but vulnerable to recognition. For the predators of pain cannot survive without hosts. And once the host awakens, once the contract is revoked, once the ritual is inverted, the prison crumbles. The spirits that haunted Sumer still whisper in the corridors of our lives. But you are no longer a prisoner unless you choose to be. If Sumer's spirits still breathe through our fears, Then every shadow at a doorway and every cry in the night may be their echo. What we forget, they consume. In the next descent, we face those crowned, not in pain, but in fire, the sovereigns of flame. Subscribe and descend deeper.